FNaF community is vast and ever expanding, with fans being found across platforms, hobbies, and age groups. However, one of the most coherent hobbies of FNaF fans is the role of being a theorizer, or theorist. That is, to try to solve pieces of the series lore using facts given to us from the games, books, or elsewhere. Recently, being a theorist has become more controversial than ever, with some series being as divisive as political opinions are, but even with all this division, there's one common denominator for all theories that spark debate. People hate bad theory etiquette. No, you didn't miss the ball on some secret official Freddy's Theorist etiquette booklet. More so, this is simply the name I've given to a collection of behaviors I've identified that can make the difference between a successful theory and a theory that, sucks. In this video, I aim to lay out those behaviors to try to begin making a refined list of the do's and don'ts of theorizing in the FNaF community. Before I begin, I would like to point out that I'll be mentioning good and bad examples of the so-called theory etiquette that I've seen. It's worth noting that if I call out any specific theorists for exercising bad etiquette, this doesn't mean they're a bad theorist. All of the people I mention in this video are actually very proficient at what they do. Sometimes people just slip up, and that's okay. Any mistakes I mention aren't for the purposes of dissing or directing criticism at any of these theorists. I just believe we can learn from these mistakes, and they also make for good talking points in this video. Every theorist mentioned in this video will be linked in the description for you to check them out. Starting with rule number 1, always cite your sources. I'm putting this rule first, as it's the most obvious, however it's also often overlooked. It's important to keep in mind even if your theory has a mistake in it. One of the most important things you can do to keep the mistake in check is to cite the sources that you gained your evidence from. It's like showing your work on a math test. If your final solution is incorrect, if your teacher is able to track your thought process coming to your solution and find the mistake, you will learn a lot more than you would have if you simply wrote down the wrong answer and had your teacher mark it incorrect. Theorizing FNaF is often done over a video format, and oftentimes citing sources involves verbally stating where you found your evidence, but if you find that it makes your script sloppy, a better option may be to have a graphic appear on the screen that lists the game, book and page number, or other sources you discuss the evidence from said source. Again, I'll restate. If you can cite specifically where you got a piece of evidence from, viewers are given the option to review the evidence themselves and correct your mistake, perhaps with their own counter evidence. Speaking of which, it's also imperative to keep in mind that the same is certainly true when calling upon other theorists' ideas in your own theories. I think game theory does a great job at this, oftentimes using the ideas of other theorists come up with, while giving them their due credit. And this brings me to rule number 2. Theorizing is a group effort, not a solo act. This one goes both ways. Firstly, it's important to keep in mind that even if there are a select set of people seen as more prominent figures in the community, it doesn't necessarily mean their word is more true than yours is. But more pressing, whenever you go to prepare a theory, never go in with the intention of being the guy who solves a specific thing. This is unfortunately a sentiment I've been seeing pop up more recently, especially over on Reddit, where some people seem to feel the need to be responsible to solve a certain mystery all on their own. This is an incredibly maladaptive perspective though. Firstly, by trying to take all the credit for solving a mystery all on your own, you're cutting out the work done by other theorists for the sake of getting some non-existent lore solver trophy. Secondly, and I will admit this is more of a subjective perspective on this behavior, trying to be the lone detective of a FNaF mystery could come across as, selfish? Keep in mind that this is the FNaF community, not the FNaF solo mission. If a specific mystery could be solved by the work of one mind alone, chances are it would have been solved already. That being said, if while researching a specific topic you think that you found the genuine answer to it, there's no problem with claiming that you've solved FNaF. I've heard it's good for views. More seriously, sometimes one person alone can stumble across the correct solution. That's just fine. Just always keep in mind, theorizing should always be about collecting and sharing clues you think others may have missed. It should never be about the glory of solving a specific problem all on your own. This brings us to rule number 3, small details matter. I understand that sometimes when you're writing a script, you may be inclined to paraphrase a quote or piece of evidence from memory for ease of writing. However, a misquote or misreference could be very dangerous, especially if you're a more prominent theorist. For this rule, I'd like to cite an example from another favorite theorist of mine, Rytoast. In a recent video, while collecting all the information we may have on the character of Cassie, he makes the following mistake.
She tells us that she remembers our special day, most likely a birthday party, and most likely our 11th birthday party. Now, she just says it was the 11th, so this could be a date, but the lack of a month suggests that it was our 11th birthday.
To restate what he says here, he claims that at the end of Ruin, Roxy says that Cassie's birthday was the 11th, implying that she is at least 11 years old. However, taking a peek at this moment as it is, Roxy actually says this.
If I remember correctly, it is on the 11th.
To clarify what happened here, Roxy specifically says Cassie's birthday was on the 11th. The Rytoast mistakenly misquoted that as her saying Cassie's birthday simply was the 11th. It's a one-word difference, but it totally changed the meaning of what's being said. Again, Rytoast is a great theorist. This was just a slight oopsie on his end. And while this specific instance certainly wasn't disastrous to its overall theory, it is a great discussion point of how misspeaking could potentially lead to a misconception in the greater community. This brings us to my 4th rule, always label your assumptions. In my opinion, the only hazard or misconception greater than misquoting is mixing up your theories with your facts. Once again, I feel we can best learn from an example here, in this case, a clip from a recent game theory.
According to the books, the AI program was originally built to play with Charlie, a girl that wore a green wristband in order for the security puppet to protect her.
I think it's especially important to be clear with fact versus assumption when discussing the books, because a good portion of the community likely doesn't actually read the books themselves, and instead has to go by word of mouth to understand what happens in them. Anyways, to clarify game theory's mistake in this clip, MatPat claims that the books state that the mimic was built for Charlie, the spirit who once possessed the puppet, but this is false. The Tales from the Pizzaplex Book 6 has a story rightfully called The Mimic. In this story, an engineer named Edwin builds the mimic for his son, and the son dies, leaving the robot to continue to mimic his behaviors. MatPat's fallacy is he skips a step in his reasoning in this clip. As just stated, the books, in fact, do not say the mimic was built for Charlie. Rather, it provides what may be seen as a parallel to Charlie. The reason why it's important to mention this line of reasoning isn't just the fact that most fans may not read the books for themselves, but it's also important to keep in mind that this line of reasoning could turn out to be false, because it involves an assumption, one not clearly stated to be that way. Once again, calling upon the math test example, this would be similar to coming to a solution on a multiple choice question and deciding to simply circle the closest answer rather than review the problem as a whole. In the case at hand, sure, it could be very likely the story of Edwin and his son parallels the story of Henry and his daughter, but it could also very well not be. In fact, it could turn out that the parallels seen here are merely coincidence, and Edwin is actually his own distinct character in the game's timeline. Point is, it's imperative to not only follow through your entire reasoning in a theory, but more specifically, to call out any assumptions as you make them, to lower the chances of misconception later down the line. This brings me to my final and 5th rule. Know your weak points. I mean this in both the small and larger senses. On a smaller scale, always point out any contradictions your theory may face. This is something game theory did a great job at in their timeline videos. By pointing out contradictions, you aren't necessarily making your theory weak. You're really just improving your credibility. As I said in rule number 2, it's important that theorizing is focused on collecting and presenting evidence, not necessarily coming to a final correct solution. Your theory may bring up some great ideas, but fall short in some other areas. By calling out these areas of weakness, you open the door for other theorists to review your findings and fill in the weaker gaps with stronger points. With this, never feel that you have to throw out a theory because 1 or 2 points has a contradiction, as the other points you make could still have value. As long as you recognize these weak points, all should be well in the end. On a broader scope, when a theory is finalized and sent off into the wild for review, never feel the need to die on the hill of defending it. There's a lot of sources for information in the series, and sometimes you may miss some details that can cause your theory to crumble, and that's okay. If your theory is verifiably wrong, you didn't necessarily waste your time. By taking the step to come to your own conclusions, you still incited thought in the community at large, and in the end, everyone may have learned something new. Perhaps the piece of evidence that caused your theory to crumble was a little-known fact, that now has been brought to your attention and everyone else's. It lets you develop a much stronger theory than what you started off with. As we close, it's important to mention that these likely aren't all the rules you should follow in theory crafting. They're just what I see as the more important ones. Even still, keep in mind these rules aren't prescriptive. I simply made them as guidelines that may aid in creating theories, not as strict rules that would make or break them. With all that covered, best of luck in future theories. I hope these contributions will make your future contributions to the FNaF discussion all the more constructive.